So we're here to talk about birds, and we wanted to start the day with just listening to a dawn chorus. And you've probably heard this before. If you've woken up early in the morning, you step outside in the springtime is the best time to do this. And so just close your eyes maybe and reflect on a moment when you heard the dawn chorus. Excellent. So it's not exactly the same over a computer, but we hope you enjoyed that. If you're here today, it means that you probably appreciate birds. So you're in good company. And there's actually an article that came out on Tuesday about bird diversity and the correlation with happiness. So 10% increase in birds increased, it was like a life satisfaction as much as you got like comparable increase in salary, which is like, wow, money can't buy happiness, but maybe birds can. I don't know. So there's lots of reasons we like birds, and we're going to talk about some of them today, but we got to start way back at the beginning. 150 million years ago, there was the first bird, Archaeopteryx, but they're finding dinosaurs even before that had feathers. So who was the first bird? I don't know. You could argue a whole bunch of different things, whole bunch of different species on that. And birds have lived across every continent, and they have been a part of human culture for a long time through history. They've helped us to understand how the world works. They're often portrayed as messengers, maybe between gods and humans or humans and dead. And they're still portrayed as messengers in stories today, like Hedwig and the other owls from the Harry Potter world, literally deliver the mail. So literal messengers. So this is kind of continuing on in our current storytelling. And going back again into ancient history and Greek mythology, the famous story of Icarus, it just goes to show how much humans have always envied flight. You know, Icarus wanted, he got the wings made out of the wax and the feathers to escape Crete, and he got so excited about it, he flew too close to the sun, his wings melted, and he perished. But there's a lot of, morals you could take out of that story, but one that I take is we've always been jealous and wanted to fly. And even today, our superheroes, it's one of the most common superpowers. And I bet if we were to ask everybody here, what superpower would you choose? A lot of us would choose flight just because it's so cool. I would definitely be at the top of my list. So how do they do it? How do they bird, right? How do they be a bird? They've got a lot of unique biology. This comic is from Bird and Moon. I highly recommend you check her out. She's online. She's great. But birds have a lot of unique biology that helps them to do what they do. Feathers are a huge part of this. Hollow bones are another really important part. And then a part that doesn't get talked about as much, but I think is so cool and so important, is how they breathe. They are expert breathers. They are better than us at breathing. They're better than like Usain Bolt and the best human breathers, because we breathe in and out. It's like one direction, right? Everything goes in, everything goes out. But birds, their air travels in like this one-way loop through these like air sacs, and it's kind of complicated, but basically, to break it down, it's like the chunk of air that they breathe in stays inside their body and loops around for 2 breathing cycles, right? So rather than just all of it in, all of it out, it actually goes in, cycles, and then comes out, which is just like super cool. Check out more about bird physiology because it's so interesting, and they are so specialized at what they do. This bird is called an Arctic tern, and it is one of the, it is the best migratory bird. It will travel from the Arctic Circle all the way down to Antarctica and back again, like, you know, like it's no big deal. And it's a very small bird, you know, smaller than a seagull. This beautiful little thing is from Europe, and it's called a common swift. And there was a study done on them that where they found that these guys stay airborne for 10 months. So if you can imagine, dude, 10 months of flying, crazy, right? So birds do a lot of important things to us. Not only are they super cool, but they also do great things for the environment. They do great things for humans. They are pollinators. They move seeds. Of course, people like Michelle like hearing about this, the plants. So it's really nice to think about like what they do as well as how they do it. This is a barn swallow, and barn swallow are pest control heroes. They will eat 60 insects per hour, which translates to about 850 insects per day. So if you are someone who does not appreciate mosquitoes in your backyard, this is one of your best friends because it's taking care of those for you. And here's another very important bird. You may have seen bird boxes, those big boxes out in the vineyards for these guys, the barn owls. And the reason they do that is barn owls can eat 1,500 small rodents in a year. So they are great pest control, you know, clearing out the vineyards of those rodents. So birds have a lot of specific requirements. This is something that's very important to keep in mind, especially when we're thinking about land management and what we're doing in our own lives. A lot of birds rely on certain species and on certain plant communities to survive. Some of them like wetlands, some of them like forests. You've probably heard of birds like the spotted owl that require those old growth forests to live. So there are also birds that are more comfortable living near edges or further away from edges. So if there's a road, they might need more space. There's birds that need cavity nests, like this kestrel. So after something like a fire, it's tempting to go through and like cut down all the trees. Oh, they look ugly, but we really encourage people to not do that. And at Pepperwood, we left a bunch of our, most of our trees that died from fires and trees that just die naturally from other reasons because of cavity nesters, because those habitats are so important. The only trees that we did remove were trees that were next to like the road or near a trail where they might become a problem for hikers or cars. This is super cool. This was this was not done in California. This was in the northeastern United States, but there was a study done on warblers and looking at what their foraging zones were. And so you can see these trees within a tree, the warblers kind of spread out and will eat out of certain parts of the tree, which is just so cool because then they're not competing as much with each other, right? They're all able to, you know, have the buffet of insects without competing. And it's interesting to think about this because what would happen if this forest changed? If the top or the bottom of the trees were removed or had some sort of issue? And so this is something that we've actually seen. In mountainous Arizona, there was a decline in snowfall, songbirds, and deciduous trees. And so people were wondering, well, what's going on? They finally figured out that the decline in snowfall meant that the elk in the area were able to get to some of those deciduous trees in the winter that they weren't able to before, and they were browsing on them. And the reduction of the deciduous trees, because the elk were eating them, meant that the songbirds were then impacted when they came in the spring. They didn't have nesting sites or, you know, didn't have food sources. So it's really interesting to see how things like climate change really can have an impact on our birds in ways that you might not think about. Like, who thought that it would be climate change, elk, deciduous tree, bird, right? It's kind of a strange, you know, trickle down effect. And so Audubon noticed this, they, you know, as many people have, that birds are climate sensitive. And so they started looking closely at this, and they looked at what ranges the birds currently have in North America. And they made some projections based on climate models. Where will those ranges be? What will they look like in the future with climate change? And they found that there are 389 birds that are at risk of losing their ranges and not gaining ranges in other places, right? So they're calling them climate threatened or climate endangered. And this is really worrisome. And in fact, there was another study that was done that showed that 2.9 billion birds have disappeared in the last 50 years. And from this study, some of the birds did increase. They did an overall study of North American breeding birds. And there was increases and decreases, but overall, 2.9 billion birds decrease. That's a huge amount. Yeah, we're seeing this in locally as well. We're seeing it in hearing a decline in species. So I'm going to pass it on to Michelle to tell us a little bit more about this study done locally in Sugarloaf.
Yeah, so for those of you that are not in Sonoma County, here locally we have a state park called Sugarloaf. And this is a picture here of Bernie Krause, who you may have heard of. He's a renowned expert. I almost want to call him an audiologist, someone who he records soundscapes. And he's been doing it for over 50 years now. And he had, for many years been recording dawn choruses within Sugarloaf Park. And he would put his equipment out at the park in the same location every year on April 15th, using the same techniques and the same post-processing. So we're going to play one of the soundscapes for you from this park. And so the changes you're hearing through these years were actually most likely due to the fact that in this region we were experiencing a long drought that peaked in 2014 and 2015. And this image you see at the top here is called a spectrogram or a sonograph, and it basically visualizes the sound, that recording, with color, and the brighter the color, the louder the noise, the higher the color is located, the higher the frequency. And so you can actually kind of visualize different bird calls depending where you are on this spectrogram. One thing to note is that in 2004 and 2009, there was a stream running at this location. And so that's a lot of this noise you can visually see, and you might hear it in the recording at the base. In 2014, there was a slight trickle, and in 2015, at the peak of the drought, there was no water at all. And so we're gonna listen to this and hear the impacts of this drought on the species present. And hopefully it comes through. I apologize, it is an audio recording on my computer. This is, I should say, available on YouTube. So it is accessible if you look it up and want to hear a better recording of it. So let's take a listen. Now we're moving into 2009. (2014), and I almost don't even have to keep playing it. You just can barely hear. There's a towhee chirping in the background, but not much else. Pretty depressing. There have been people on the ground, so not just recording sound throughout the US and North America, but also physically on the ground documenting birds through this North American Breeding Bird Survey project, which has been going on since the 1960s. And each one of these blue little dots or lines you see here are physical locations where people go repeatedly on an annual basis and take what's called a point count. They stand in one place for a certain amount of time, a standardized amount of time, and they document how many birds they hear or see, as well as any breeding behaviors they might observe. And we do something very similar here at Pepperwood. We have what's called our Breeding Bird Survey, which is an annual point count survey. It's just slightly different compared to the North American survey. We use a protocol that is standardized and is used through Point Blue Conservation. If you've heard of them, they do a lot of birding throughout our region. And what we do is every year between April through June, we go out to each one of these points you see here, and our birders stand there for 5 minutes documenting all the birds they see or hear. And they go out through that breeding bird window, April through June, 3 times each year. So each one of these points is visited 3 times in a given year. And we utilize expert community scientists. These are volunteers that are really good birders that come out on an annual basis to help us out. Now, when you think about this project, it's really important. All the stuff I'm going to be sharing with you from here on out, we really need to consider the context under which we are observing our birds. We are an actively managed, or I'd like to think of it as stewarded property, where we have active, forest management, grassland management going on. And we also recently experienced 2 wildfires that came through. This map here is a picture of those wildfires. The black perimeter you see is Pepperwood. The blue dots are those breeding bird point count locations. The yellow here are locations that were burnt just in the Tubbs fire of October 2017. The pink are just the one we had in 2019, Kincaid fire. And then this orange middle section is the overlap where we experienced 2 back-to-back fires. And I should say Tubbs burnt about 95% of our preserve, whereas Kincaid burnt about 60%. And so I'm going to share with you literally hot off the press, information. Nicole and I have been working really hard to get this data crunched and analyzed right before this lecture. So we're really excited to share with you the results from this study from 2007 to 2020. So we have 14 seasons of data to share with you. And to start, we're going to start at the more high level perspective, just what kinds of information can we pull out of these data to give us a sense of, who's living here, who's moving through, what is the health of our bird community like? And we can break it down into categories such as species. So these are the number of species we've seen throughout the entire study. And we've detected 99 different bird species. That includes birds we've only seen once, as well as birds we've seen every single year throughout. And 36 of those species are migratory. Migratory in this sense is at the scale of Sonoma County. So migratory being a bird that leaves Sonoma County, whether they go to the Sierra or down to Mexico at some point in their life cycle. And then we can look at the number of individuals. So of those 99 species, how many are we seeing among all the years or each year? And in total, we've documented over 15,000 individual birds at the preserve. Another way we can break down the information to get a sense of the community that's here is what trophic level or food web, food chain level do these birds occupy? I've put pie charts together here as far as the number of species that fit these different trophic levels of carnivore. So carnivores being meat eaters. Those could be your birds of prey or even like a great blue heron that is a carnivore. We have omnivores that equally eat, birds, or animals and plants. We have insectivores, which in this case, because birds don't just fit the insectivore category and the herbivore category really tightly, they often they like to eat both. Insectivores in this case are birds that during the breeding season have a preference for insects. And because we're documenting them during the breeding season, we kind of lump them into that insectivore category. And you can imagine, if you're a bird and you are making eggs and you're fighting, defending your territories during the breeding season, you have bright plumage, you have to feed your young, that takes a lot of energy. And so shifting your diet more towards high fat and protein insects makes a lot of sense. It's good fuel for those activities. And then herbivores in this case are birds that tend to prefer plants, seeds, fruits, etc., for most of their diet. An example of an omnivore in this case, I should say, is like a crow is a classic omnivore. So looking at these different categories, we have about 100 species here. So that this 16% carnivore really translates to 16 species of carnivorous birds that we've detected. But they only make up 2% of the individuals. And from a community perspective, that makes sense. It takes a wide base of animals to support fewer carnivores at the top of that food chain. And so this is good. This is good to see. The majority that we see as far as these food levels are insectivores. And that to me really highlights how, at Pepperwood, I think about all of our biological monitoring we're doing. We're trying to be very comprehensive with understanding the whole ecosystem and how it's interacting, and the benefits we reap from that as our human population. And one of the biggest gaps we have, I think, taxonomically that we are not monitoring are insects. And yet here we have, like, the majority of our bird species are relying on insects for their food during the breeding bird season. So that's one thing that I realize we really need to push and try to get resources to do, is to monitor our invertebrates. And so here, hot off the press, are our top 10 birds with the most observations. In number 1, we've got dark-eyed junco, which is the Oregon form. If you are a bird nerd, you know what that means. With over 1,500 observations in that full period of the study, 2007 to 2020. In second place is acorn woodpecker, Pacific slope flycatcher, spotted towhee, Steller's jay, violet green swallow, oak titmouse, one of my favorites. We've got warbling vireo, western meadowlark, and then tied in 10th place is the house wren and mourning dove. Did I get it all, Nicole? That was like my bird quiz. Yay, I did it. And then these two here, boxed in yellow, these are climate threatened species that, Nicole was mentioning the Audubon study. These two species, the Pacific slope flycatcher and violet green swallow, are considered climate threatened. And yet they make our top 10 list. So the habitat we have at Pepperwood, the way that we're stewarding our landscaping, is supporting these individuals, and we're really proud of that. Okay, so I am a scientist. I love graphs. You've probably heard me say that many times if you've heard any lectures from me before, but it's really because these graphs help pull together all this noisy information and then illustrate what is happening out there, and helps us tell a story and really learn about our preserve, learn about our region, and consider that, make those, make decisions based on that information so that we can best steward our land. And so I'm going to walk you through each of these graphs. Moving forward, they're going to look really similar. What I've done on most of these is I have put a gray box for that drought period, the period that, Bernie Krause detected the decline of birds here. And then I've also punctuated the Tubbs fire and the Kincaid fire so that you can kind of look and see what was happening before the fires, what was happening after. Did the drought maybe have any influence on the number of birds we've seen? And this graph here in particular is showing us the number of species we saw from year to year throughout the study. Remember, overall, the whole study, we saw 99 birds, but we don't see all 99 every year. Instead, on average, we see about 60 to 70, maybe 72 was our peak year. But on average, we have a very consistent amount of species that we're documenting from year to year. Now, if you break that down by individuals, the number of birds observed by year, the chart looks a little different. I have split up these bars into 4 different colors that are relating to the 4 different transects that we monitor. So, and that's because not every year do we sample every single thing. When we first started the project in 2007, we only sampled about half the sampling area that we currently do. And so there's a difference in sampling effort here from year to year that's illustrated with these colors. That's also something to consider moving forward. I'll show you how I deal with that sampling difference, and we can incorporate that into our models. But overall, we have a slight increase through the years. One thing to note, what do you see? 2020, boom. When I started entering, after Nicole entered the data and I took it, I'm starting to play with it, I go, whoa, we saw a lot more birds this past spring than we have in the history of our project. So right away we go, well, why might that be? And there's a number of factors I'm going to go into, all of which probably have some influence into why we might be seeing that jump. And I made a list because it's kind of a lengthy list. So the first one I want to bring up is that throughout the majority of, the entire length of this project, with the exception of this last year, we have relied on our expert excellent expert birders and our volunteers to do the project. And these are groups of people, 1 to mostly 3 or so people who come together at the preserve on an annual basis 3 times each year to monitor their transects. So we have really consistent data and a consistent kind of exposure to the birds at Pepperwood among these years. Well, because of the pandemic, we weren't able to bring up our typical birder groups. And so Nicole here and her husband, Danny graciously volunteered all his time to sample every single point 3 times each. So Nicole and Danny were on the preserve 12 times in 2020 and did the full survey themselves. So right there, there's a difference in the people sampling. They might have different experiences. They might have their special birds that they're used to hearing. And so we cannot discredit that it could be due to sampling variance. Other things that might influence this is we had 2 back-to-back fires. So maybe what we're seeing really is an elevation in the number of birds. Maybe they were pushed into our region and we're here. We also, there are studies that show after wildfire, animal observations can increase, and sometimes significantly, because you can see and hear animals better because there's less vegetation. The shrubs open up, the forest opens up, so you can hear and see things better, and that might increase your observations. We also were in the height of the pandemic shelter-in-place order within Sonoma County. People were not traveling on roads. There wasn't the noise that we typically hear. Even at the preserve, we do hear traffic. And the fact that there weren't people running around on the preserve might have influenced the birds. So all of these factors are feeding into this elevated number of birds we observed. So we just need to consider that moving forward. And I'm going to show the data. I haven't modified it at all for the charts I'm going to show you moving on. But one thing we're going to do, I should say, is we can contact people like Point Blue. Hey, have you guys seen an elevation in birds as well? We can look at other studies in our region and compare our observations to them. And what we're going to do is we're going to have Danny and Nicole come back and hopefully sample, if we're allowed to, bring our volunteers back up at the same time without influencing each other, so we can see if there are some discrepancies there. So we have some fun times ahead of us. All right, I know that was lengthy, but I think it's really important to consider that every year and every modification of your protocol can influence the data and the results. This here is a graph of California scrub jay, and this is where we have standardized for that difference in sampling among years. We have standardized it into what's called an abundance index. So you don't have to worry about that anymore. That's been taken care of in all of these graphs moving forward. What you do see is that over the years, we have seen an increase in observations of California scrub jay. And what we can do is we can try to fit what's called a linear regression on these to determine if that change over time is a significant increase or decrease. And in fact, California scrub jay is significantly increasing about 3.4% per year. Yay, that's great news. So taking all of these species, I can look at each individual ones that we have enough observations for, right? At least 6 observations throughout our whole study period and more. We can look at them and we can fit these models to them. Sometimes we have to modify them a little bit, but we can fit these linear models and we can say, how are these species doing at Pepperwood relative to that breeding bird survey that's done throughout North America? And that study, what's great is they have, they analyze the data, the North American Breeding Bird Survey, they analyze the data into these different regions and timeframes. And so what I've done is created this matrix here where Pepperwood birds that are declining, stable, or increasing are across this matrix, this row, these columns here. And then coastal California, how the birds are doing from this study are going to be along this this axis. I knew I would mess this up. It's a complicated thing, but I want to walk you through it because it's a great visualization once we get it. So we'll do this together. So birds in this box and I'm going to list them eventually. Birds in this box are significantly declining at Pepperwood through our study period, and they are significantly declining from this study. Understanding the study is a little different in their protocol and the time frame, but it's very close. So it gives us a sense of how are Pepperwood's birds that are declining doing compared to the state in coastal California. Birds here are stable at Pepperwood, but declining in coastal California. So ours are doing a little bit better. And birds in this box are significantly increasing at Pepperwood, but declining in the coastal California zone. So we're doing really good here. And we might be providing refugia or doing something right with our land management. And so from these categories, I'm gonna basically walk us through some examples of birds that fit them. But first I want to show you, we do have, these are the number of species with enough detections that land in these categories. And the good news here, we have none that are declining at Pepperwood, but increasing regionally. Nobody wants to see birds go into this box. So we're really happy about this. Now I know this is kind of confusing, so we're actually going to pause right here. And if you guys have questions about this, please put them in the chat and we'll address them right now. So do you have any questions about this matrix, knowing that I'm going to show you the birds that land in these categories and talk about them in more detail moving forward?
While people are thinking about their questions about this graph, I could answer a question that was asked a little bit earlier. The question was asked about how we categorized birds into insectivores versus omnivores versus herbivores. And I will say it was not as easy as you'd expect, right? Like some birds you think they eat one thing, but so I actually ended up looking everybody up, even though I've got some previous knowledge. And the question about hummingbirds, I actually put them in the herbivore category, though they do eat insects. I was trying to find a percentage and I couldn't. If you have a good source for hummingbird diets, especially in the springtime, I think they lean towards the nectar, especially because there's an abundance of flowers in the springtime available to them. But I would love to learn more, Julie, if you've got more information about that.
Science is never black and white. Nature is messy, as it should be, right? As it should be. Okay, so
great. There's a great photo that like won a contest of a hummingbird eating a bumblebee, which was like
that's rad.
Bird's head. It was incredible. So they are insect eaters. But yeah.
Any questions about this matrix at all?
I don't see any that have come in, so I think we're good to go.
All right, we just want to make sure it makes sense, kind of how it's portrayed here. So here we are. Here are the birds, and there's a lot of them. So I'll just kind of walk you through how I've used different, type fonts and stuff to demonstrate the different categories we have here represented. And actually, Holland's going to post a key to this table in the chat for you guys to refer to. So birds that are italicized are migratory birds. Birds that are bold and underlined, like warbling vireo, and then this group over here, those are birds that are either increasing or decreasing at greater than 3% per year. Birds that have asterisks are climate threatened according to that Audubon study. And birds listed in this red font here are the 2 introduced species we have, European starling and wild turkey. All the rest are native to our region. Okay. So with that in mind, I'm going to move us through these main categories we have, starting with this declining column. So these are birds that are significantly declining at Pepperwood. And in particular, we're going to talk about the warbling vireo. So we're going to dive into this sad tale, and Nicole's going to launch us off with some of the cool ecology behind warbling vireo.
Thanks, Michelle. So here's our little warbling vireo friend. They're so sweet. They're about the size of a chickadee, so they're pretty small, not a little smaller than a sparrow. And you can see by their color that they really blend in, so they can be kind of hard to see. They're much easier to hear. They sound a bit like a robin singing, if you've ever heard a robin singing in your yard before. And they prefer trees that are wet and shady. So woodlands that have like a stream, and they really do prefer deciduous trees. So this picture is taken down in Martin Creek, and this is perfect warbling vireo habitat. I can almost hear them just looking at this photo. They mostly eat insects, or they do eat insects as their primary diet. So I think that's also important to keep in mind too when we talk about numbers. This, I wanted to talk to you a moment just about maps. So this is a map that you might find in like a field guide. The red or orange color is breeding season, migratory is yellow, non-breeding, so the winter time basically is the blue, and then year-round is purple for these maps. So I wanted to show you this other really cool map though, because that's one you might see, it's kind of simple. This one is based off of eBird observations. And if you don't know what eBird is, I highly recommend you check out eBird. It's a great source for uploading your bird lists, and they have created some really cool graphics based off of that information. So they took everybody's sightings and then they did some extrapolation to create this map of the ranges of these creatures, warbling vireo. I wanted to point out the red, so that's breeding season, and abundance, which Michelle was mentioning earlier. That's one way that we tell how many are around. The darker red, the more birds there are. And so if you look at where Sonoma County is, it's kind of in like the darker end of that red. So we're well within the range for this bird in the summertime. I want to show you another really cool map. This one is an animation of their migration. So the yellow colors are fewer birds, purple, more birds. And then below that, it says the week of the year. So January, February, March, April, all the way through to December. So keep an eye on that. We're going to play this through a few times, and just look at this beautiful, you can just imagine the birds migrating in and then back down. So you'll notice these birds do spend their winters down in Mexico, down in Central America. And so that's another really important thing to consider is not just, how are the birds doing here, but are they doing in other places as well? It's such a pretty map. I love it.
Art and science.
I know.
So what's happening at Pepperwood with warbling vireos? Sadly, just like in coastal California, we are definitely observing a significant decline of about 4% per year. And a few things to note here with this graph is that we saw a really strong decline in 2012 at the onset of the drought. Now, another thing that occurred in 2012 is we had a shift in volunteers. So perhaps that, that expert birder that really knew their warbling vireos might not have been in the cohort that started up in 2012. I can't speak to that directly, I'm not sure, but that could be influencing this drop in numbers here. Regardless, this is a statistically significant decline, and we are seeing further declines after the drought and after the 2 back-to-back wildfires. So where do warbling vireos occur at the preserve? As Nicole mentioned, moist, shady places. This is that Martin Creek stretch, that photo we showed with lots of deciduous trees, nice and moist, and our more densely forested areas here. In these maps, the blue circles are places where we see birds. We've detected birds throughout the study, and the size of the circle is related to how many birds we've seen at that location among those years. And that scale will change depending on the bird I'm talking about moving forward. So keep that in mind. Points that are yellow are where we did not see any birds at all for the entire study. And so one thing I want to point out here is along this, what we call our Rogers Canyon transect, these dates relate to the last year we observed warbling vireos in that area. So what's interesting to note is it wasn't just a decline throughout the preserve, it was really this one specific location where we saw warbling vireos start dropping off. So something might be happening there locally. Whether it's maybe a hydrologic change or change in vegetation. And this was well before the wildfires, but at the time of the drought. So there might've been something impacting them there. And then another thing to think about is, They like these shady, moist places, and they retreat down to Central America, South America to overwinter. And so they have been found to basically go and overwinter in shade-grown coffee plantations. So if you're concerned about supporting warbling vireos, we highly recommend that you purchase shade-grown coffee. Organic would be even better because they are insectivores, and insecticides could be detrimental to this bird. And then why not throw in fair trade while you're at it? And instead of, this is a non-shade grown coffee plantation, which is very bright, sunny. There's not much structure there. And so this is a place that warbling vireos would not inhabit. Okay, so we're going to move on now from the sad story of warbling vireo onto a success story here with our increasing birds. The western meadowlark is going to be the example that I pull. And here we go, Nicole. You want to tell us a little bit about western meadowlarks?
I would love to. It's one of my favorite birds to hear in the spring. If you've ever heard it, you know exactly what I'm talking about. They're beautiful singers. They're about the size of a robin, and you can see by their back, they're very well camouflaged when you're looking at them from this direction. But if they turn around, then all of a sudden you get this bright yellow flash, which is just as beautiful as they're singing, I think. They fly a bit like a chicken, kind of with their wings kind of curved downward, and they've got white on their tails. So if you see a big flock kind of flying like that away from you, could be meadowlarks, especially if you're in a grassland, because that's where they like to live. They really like open grasslands. They eat insects and seeds. They're ground nesters. And this time of year, they hang out in really big winter flocks. Like 100 birds sometimes. At Pepperwood a few weekends ago, I saw a flock and we were trying to estimate. It's really hard because they kind of they fly for a moment and then land, and then the next group flies and lands. But doing some counting, estimating maybe 70 birds, which was more than I've ever seen at Pepperwood before. So it was very exciting to see them. They're also the state bird in like 6 states, which is kind of funny to me, spread the love, but I love meadowlarks, so maybe that's okay. Here's another one of those really cool maps showing their abundance. Notice the purple is year-round, and that's where they fall for us in the map in Sonoma County, although, not a whole lot in Sonoma County. Notice how many there are in the Central Valley, though. They like those big open fields. And so we do think about meadowlarks when we're thinking about our management practices, and Michelle's going to tell us a little bit more about how we are supporting our grasslands.
Yeah, so for me, we put a lot of effort into managing and monitoring our grasslands, and so to see this outcome of our western meadowlark populations are increasing over time it just feels really great. It means we're doing a good job. And those of you who are familiar with Pepperwood, about 900 acres are grassland, open grassland. And for grasslands to stay grassland, they require, that plant community requires disturbance. Whether, historically it was large ungulates moving through, whether it's cattle, so we do graze our preserve, or other tools that we use like prescribed fire, which I'll show you next. I love this image because it really shows kind of, again, the context under which we're talking about these birds. We have, if you don't have disturbance, what happens in our grasslands is they will have succession. You start getting these shrubs. This is coyote brush. It is a native brush. We are not trying to eradicate coyote brush. We're just trying to keep it at bay so it doesn't take over. If you remove cattle and disturbance, the shrubs would move in and it would convert to forest, and we would lose western meadowlark habitat, for instance. We would lose that diversity. Our cattle rotate through, so there's long periods of rest that allow birds to stay occupied, and western meadowlarks are a ground nesting bird, so we really think about that with regards to timing, and then also keeping structure in our grasslands with some, dead snags, rocky outcrops, shrubs. Those allow perching places that a lot of other birds like to utilize. And here's an example of prescribed burning, which we do at the preserve, mostly to control for thatch and fuels, as well as invasive grass species. And anytime we have a prescribed burn, we actually go out and we look for ground nesting birds and flush them out so that we can try to see if there are nests in the region. And we have flagged nests in the past so that CAL FIRE, who helps us with these burns, won't have negative impacts on those individuals. And so here's that lovely graph of Western meadowlark increasing among the years significantly over time, even after these two wildfires. So our grasslands are really resilient to wildfire, as well as these birds that we are hosting. And here's where they occur among the years. In this case, the extra large circle you see is greater than 50 individuals documented among the years, with the number one point being up at the top of Three Tree Hill with 96 observations. But pretty much anywhere there's an open grassland area, even where there's tons of forest, and then you get down to this open flat, we've seen Western meadowlarks there. So that really shows you the affiliation with that open land. For you birders, I have to throw this in. This is another grassland bird that is a ground nester. And this is a very uncommon bird in California. And yet it's not significantly increasing or decreasing over time. It's in that stable category. We have very few individuals, but they have maintained their presence among the years. It's a migratory bird, and I want to show you how uncommon it is in California related to the rest of its range. And we're darn proud that we have grasshopper sparrows here. So very few places in California support this bird compared to the rest of its range. And grasshopper sparrows are doing well. I've learned its call, and once you hear it, man, it's like, oh, there's one. It's a really high-pitched call. All right, so now I'm going to go into that central, the biggest category we have, which is these are all the birds that are stable at Pepperwood. So that grasshopper sparrow is a good example of a bird that we don't have very many observations of, but is stable among the years. This category can also be birds that we see a ton of among the years, and there's not really much change over time up or down. And the examples I'm going to pull from this category are two examples that are really related to the current wildfires we had. The wren tit, which is unfortunately the fire loser in this case, and then lazuli bunting, which is the fire winner. Take it away, Nicole. Tell us about wren tits.
Oh, poor little wren tits. So wren tits are neither wrens nor tits, but they're actually something called an old world warbler, which I can't think of any other species in the United States that falls into this category, so it's kind of cool. They like eating insects, fruit, poison oak, which is what you can see this little friend standing in. Doesn't seem to bother them, but they love eating poison oak fruits. And if you're really lucky, you'll get to see them like this, but more often they look like this, because they love living in those dense thickets and the chaparral, in like scrubby bushes. And so this is really where they love to live. They mate for life, and they live basically where they are born. They live within like 2 acres and don't really leave their little home bodies. So that's kind of an interesting thing to think about when you're thinking about management and thinking about where you might see them. And they're also like they're West Coast buddies. They're from here. They're only found on the West Coast, so pretty special bird that we get to have here in California and along the West Coast. So this is a picture of a hillside where we used to hear a lot of wren tits in this area, and then the Tubbs fire came through. This picture was taken just after the Tubbs fire, and you can see that those chaparral bushes really got hit hard, and just it's just branches left, right? The dense shrub is gone. This is a year later. The grass has regrown, but those shrubs, especially in the back, that's all leather oak. It takes a really long time for that to rebound. It will, but it just takes a while. And so year 1, not so much going on. Year 2, we finally are seeing some toyon berries. So that's a really important food source over in that bush that Michelle's cursor is on. But still very thin, like those, it's not as densely, those thickets aren't there yet to support the wren tits. And if you were going to go back today and take another picture, it would look very similar to this. Although I will say the toyon berries this year are they are really beautiful. There's a lot of toyon berries out there, but those thickets are just not there yet. And if there's no wren tits being born here, you know, what's going to happen. So here's the graph. Michelle, take it away.
Yeah, so wren tits, you know, among all the sampling years we've had is in the stable category. It's not really going up, not really going down. However, you know, if you look at more recent trends, we've seen a really sharp decline, especially following the 2 back-to-back wildfires that basically converted their shrub cover to open, right? And maybe even impacted these birds directly, unfortunately. Where do we see wren tits on the preserve? Well, where we see the shrubs, right? And that's mostly at the entrance of the preserve here. In fact, the photos you were looking at is from an area right here, as well as along the Rogers Creek area, where we have a lot of kind of patchy forests with open kind of thickets of coyote brush and other, you know, blackberries and things like that. The dates you see here are associated with the last year we observed wren tits in that location. And you can see the majority are 2018, 2019. That's post Tubbs fire and right before the Kincaid fire. And in fact, this last year after the Kincaid fire, we only saw wren tits in these 2 yellow circles. So a pretty rapid decline, which is it's disheartening. However, as the vegetation communities rebound, we are monitoring every year, and hopefully we'll start seeing them come back. And that's a really great thing about these long-term projects is you get a sense of predator-prey cycles, population booms and busts, and we can have a better sense of the overall ecology of these birds. And I should say we're also planting. We're doing some restoration plantings in areas that were hit pretty hard, so that we're trying to increase that native shrub cover in those zones. And then the fire winner. How about lazuli buntings?
Another one of my favorite. Look how beautiful that male is with the blue. The female's in the lower corner, brown so that she blends into the nest and is less likely to get eaten while sitting on those eggs. They have a beautiful song as well, and you'll hear them before you see them. And they do like drier areas, so which is, maybe why they're winners in this case. More arid areas, more edge habitat, so the areas between forest and grassland or forest and chaparral, kind of that mixed community. They eat seeds, fruits, insects, and they kind of breed in local clusters. So you'll see a bunch of them in one area, and then right next door you won't see any. So it's kind of an interesting dynamic. Here's the map. So you can see the breeding season. They do hang out here in California and Sonoma County, and they spend their winters down in Mexico. Here's the beautiful art and science combined. Some little steam going on here. If you don't know very much about eBird, highly recommend you check them out. I can't say that enough.
And so here are the results from our study. We've seen lazuli buntings among the years, very few. And the 3 years before the Tubbs fire, we saw none during our breeding bird survey. After the Tubbs fire, we detected more than ever before. That was maintained that second year after. And after the Kincaid fire, we were really curious. Gosh, I wonder if lazuli buntings are just going to be flushed out because there's been too frequent fires. But instead, Danny and Nicole had the pleasure of documenting a lot of them. In fact, they observed 90 different observations of lazuli buntings during their sampling. In fact, I ran into Danny and Nicole in the field one morning, and they were like, "Oh, you hear that? Lazuli bunting." They were out there in full force. It was really great. And here's where they have been observed. So this is the full study period, 2007 to 2020. So pretty much across the preserve, but mostly in these places where there's a lot of edge habitat, including the double ponds and turtle ponds areas, if you're familiar with those. Now, reminder, we didn't see any 3 years prior to the Tubbs fire, none. This is after the Tubbs fire, 2 years, and then after the Kincaid fire this past year. So quite an increase in their presence and occurrence across the preserve. Okay, so I know that was a lot of information. We're at the tail end of our conversation today, and I just want to zoom back out into, the big picture here, the full landscape context, the reason why we monitor birds. You know, we are all responsible for stewarding our landscape. Our habitat is this habitat here, and we coexist with these organisms that rely on this place to sustain them. And so, you know, there's just this ethical need to support these populations and be grateful for the ecosystem services that they're providing for all of us. One of the things I always think about with Pepperwood is that we manage and steward our landscape in diverse ways to support a diversity of habitat and structure, which then lends itself into that expression of biodiversity. And I can't remember what else I was going to say here. I get very overwhelmed with like this responsibility and the need for data to help support that process. Oh, I know what I was going to say. This triggered it. So the breeding bird survey is just a short little window, April through June every year. But if we really want to understand biodiversity of birds, we would have to be out there birding every day, all day long, all year long, right? We can do that a little bit easier with those audio recordings. That's a lot of post-processing. However, so we're really thinking about this comprehensive monitoring we're doing and where there's places we might be able to supplement and maybe add additional monitoring for birds such as this one that Nicole's going to tell you about.
Yes, this little cutie is a burrowing owl, and at Pepperwood it migrates through. So we'll see it for a couple days in October and November, maybe a week or two. It kind of just shows up and someone will say, oh, the burrowing owl's back, and I'll run out there with my camera and try to see it. So this is this year. So it did show up in 2020 despite everything else going on. And it's been showing up for years. So I think it'd be really interesting to do a survey during migration season to see who else is stopping by just for a short period of time. This is a common porwell. This is a bird that shows up in the evening time. And so if you're not doing surveys in the evening, you're really not going to see this friend. So I think it'd be really cool to do a survey like in the evening into the night. You'd get some owls that way and some other really interesting species. And then another bird that I wanted to point out is this California quail. So according to Audubon, California quails are a climate threatened species in the winter time. In the summer and spring, they're doing okay, but if when the temperature rises, depending on how much, this little friend is at risk. So I think winter surveys would be a really great way to keep track of these species, because they got to do well in all seasons in order to be able to live here in Sonoma County. It's very important. So I've been referencing this Audubon study a lot, so we wanted to tell you how you can check it out yourself. If you go to audubon.org, you kind of have to search around a little bit, but if you can find a place where they talk about climate and that image that you saw earlier with the red and black with the species on the brink, scroll down and you can put in your own zip code and it will pop out a list of local birds in your areas that have high vulnerability, moderate, and low, and in summer and in winter. And it's a really, really interesting list to look at. And it has some really interesting interactive graphics like this one that separates the birds into different categories over on the left, and then represents them with those little lines and shows that if they're less vulnerable or more vulnerable. And you can click on them to get more information about individual species. And this particular graphic is Sonoma County with a warming of 3 degrees Celsius in the summer. And you can kind of mess around with those settings. Like, what if it only warms 2 degrees Celsius? What if it's in the winter? So highly recommend you check this out and kind of play with it and see which birds in your areas we should be supporting.
There's lots of ways for you to get involved, you know, in your own time. eBird is one that Nicole has mentioned a lot. I want to highlight the Soundscapes to Landscapes project, which is a project Pepperwood is partnering on. It's mostly run through Sonoma State and Point Blue Conservation Science. And this is a Sonoma County-based program that's been going on for, I think, about 4 years. They started before the Tubbs fire, thank goodness. So they have pre-fire data and now post-fire data. And it's really fueled by volunteers. So volunteers help basically put these audio moth recorders out that you see in the middle here out in locations throughout Sonoma County where they turn on for a minute or two every hour for a few days and record everything they're hearing. And then there's also volunteers that are needed to help with the post-processing. So if you're interested in identifying birds from the comfort of your own home, this is a great project to get involved with. They're also going to have their last field season this spring in 2021, and they're looking for additional sites. So if you're a landowner that wants to have, host one of these recorders, please contact them and check them out at their website here.
We also wanted to tell you about some upcoming birding opportunities, including the Audubon Christmas Bird Count. This is an annual survey that's done across the United States. 2 local ones that I'm going to be involved in this year, the the Santa Rosa Count on December 20th and the West Sonoma County Count on December 27th. But these happen all over the place. If I wanted to, I could participate in like 4 different ones that are in this area, but I limit it to 2. Project Feeder Watch is another great study through Cornell where you can document the birds that are showing up in your yard. You don't need a feeder, but it does help. And you can kind of record on your own time just who's showing up in your yard. It's just kind of an interesting thing to check out. This spring, we're planning on doing a spring birding class, so stay tuned. This is kind of like sneak peek on the spring schedule. This is not on the website yet. So if you're seeing this, it's like secret information. Stay tuned for more information. And I should say that I recently taught a fall birding class that just kind of goes over the terrestrial birds of Sonoma County, and that video is on our YouTube channel. So if you haven't checked that out and you want more information about some of the birds local to Sonoma County, check out that video. And I know I've said it a bunch, but eBird, you could do that anytime, anywhere. So I check it out. There's even like a class if you beginning eBird on Cornell's website. We want to do a huge thank you to our volunteers. They are amazing, incredible people who get up really, really early in the morning and go out and bird and share their expertise with us. So I wanted to say thank you. I know Wendy is here in our audience, so thank you, Wendy, and everyone else who has helped out with this. If you're watching and you've helped, thank you, thank you, thank you. I definitely appreciate how much work you do after doing all of them this year. So thank you for your help and support.
Yeah, and I just want to reflect on that as well. I thank you all the volunteers, all the people who have helped at Pepperwood, including our members and donors. We cannot do any of this work without your support, whether it's your time or your checkbook. All of it helps. And it's just really exciting to see the community come together to produce information like this so that, again, we can learn from it, take that information and hopefully apply it to the land so that we can continue supporting these really important species. And we can't do that without your help. So with that, I thank you so much for listening in and being here with us. I hope you come away today with a renewed or new appreciation for our feathered friends, and encourage you, as things start opening up, please come join us up here, come bird with us, or you can come on plant walks too.